This is my everything SSH and SSH port tunneling lab. In this lab, I'm going to do a remote command line shell. I'm going to execute a remote command line shell with graphical support. We're going to get a remote GUI shell, an encrypted remote GUI shell with SSH port tunneling, and secure copy file transfer. And all of this is going to happen from Windows to Linux. So we're going to do this from a Windows machine to a Linux Mint machine. We're going to do SSH and SSH port tunneling. And like I said, we're going to get command line, remote command line interfaces and remote GUI interfaces. We're going to put protocols like remote desktop and HTTP through our SSH port tunnel. Also, we're going to be installing some programs to get this done. On your Windows machine, you're going to need PuTTY, Xming installed, WinSCP installed, and hopefully your version of Windows comes with remote desktop already installed. On Linux Mint, we're going to be installing OpenSSH Server, xrdp, tight VNC Server, and our desktop. Now, for this lab, I'm going to run this from a Windows computer, which will be my physical machine, to a Linux Mint computer, which I'm going to be running through a virtual machine. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. You could have that Linux Mint virtual machine running on a hypervisor or virtual machine server, like a VMware ESXi server that could be serving that virtual machine. Or you could be hosting the virtual machine yourself on your own hypervisor by installing a program like VMware Workstation, VMware Player, VirtualBox, VMware Fusion if you're running Mac, or Parallels if you're running a Mac. So it's just how you want to do this. On my Windows computer, I'm going to be running my Linux Mint virtual machine in a VMware Player or VMware Workstation Player VM. For this to work on your Linux Mint virtual machine, you're going to want to go into Settings and Network Interface, and you're going to want to set the network interface into bridged mode so that the Linux Mint virtual machine can communicate with your physical machine with your Windows computer. All right, let's get started. So in part one, I'm going to secure shell from my Windows desktop computer. I'm running Windows on my laptop over to my Linux Mint computer, which is running right here in a Linux virtual machine. Now, my Linux virtual machine has the network adapter set to bridged mode, and it has an IP address on the network. So the first thing I'll do is open up a bash terminal and find my IP address on my Linux Mint virtual machine. To do this, I'll type if config and look at my IP address. You can see it's 192.168.3.152. I'll also make sure I'm online by pinging yahoo.com. Okay, I'm getting replies, so I'll press Control-C on my keyboard to exit out, and I'm all good. So to secure shell from Windows into Linux, I'll need to run an SSH server on my Linux virtual machine. To do this, I'll do a sudo apt-get update command. To update my repositories, I'll need to put in my password. Okay, my repositories are updated. So now I'll do a sudo apt-get install open SSH-server. I'll press enter and Y to accept. And the Open SSH server is downloaded and installed, and on the last line it'll tell me that it's running. Okay, I can see that SSH start running process 3754. Let's verify this with a sudo service SSH status command. You can see SSH start running process 3754. Also, I can check to see if I'm listening on port 22. To do that, I'll do netstat-lvn and pipe it to the more command. And you can see that I'm listening on all possible IP addresses 0.0.0.0:22 on port 22. I'm also listening on port 22 with IPv6. We can tell that by these colons here. I'll do a Control-C to get out of there. And now all I need to do is go over to my Windows computer. I've already downloaded PuTTY. You can see it here, putty.exe. I'll open up PuTTY, run it, type in the IP address that I want to connect to, which is my Linux Mint virtual machine at 192.168.3.152, port 22, SSH, click Open. I'll need to accept the security certificate, so I'll click Yes, put in my username, Dan, and my password. And you can see that I now have a secure shell connection, a command line connection to my Linux virtual machine, and I'm logged in as Dan. I can do a CD command or a print working directory command, an ls command to list my directories, and I can do pretty much whatever I want to do. I can run command line programs that have a command line interface. So for instance, if I want to create a document, I could type nano test, and now I have a text document. Hello, Control X, Y, enter. Now, unfortunately, programs that require a graphical user interface, like the program gedit for a text editor, I'm not able to run because it requires a graphical user window to open. Similarly, I can't open Firefox, the web browser, because that requires a graphical user interface or graphical support. Now, if I want to browse the web, I can use a text-based web browser. If I want to do that, all I need to do is type sudo apt-get install lynx, L-Y-N-X. I'll put in my password, press Y to accept, and Lynx is installed. Now I can browse the web. I'll put in the command Lynx to launch Lynx, and I'll put in the URL http://dalbergetti.com to open up my website. And you can see that there it is. What's up, Linux class? Hello, everyone. So this is my website in just text format. This is pretty great. And in a pinch, this can be very useful. However, you're not going to be able to see images or content that requires graphics. For instance, I have an image on this page and I don't have alternative text, so I don't even know that basically it's there. So that's not so helpful. So what would be better, let me press Q to quit. What would be better is if I could have graphical user support. So if I wanted to run a program that requires a graphical window, that I would have it. So to do that, I'm going to type exit. And this time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run Xming on my desktop. You can see Xming right here. I've downloaded Xming for Windows, and I'm going to launch it. When you launch it, it runs in the system tray down here in the bottom right-hand corner. See, there's Xming. So now all I need to do to get graphical support is launch PuTTY one more time, press run. Everything is so far the same. I'll just put in the IP address of my Linux machine. Once again, it's this Linux machine that I'm remoting into, this Linux virtual machine here. Okay, 192.168.3.152. port 22 SSH, but this time I'll open up the settings for SSH, I'll expand it, go to X11, and enable X11 forwarding. Now I'll click Open, log in as my username and put in my password. Now I'm logged in the same as I was before, except if I want to now, I can launch a program like gedit, and it will open up with a graphical window or X Windows support coming from the Linux Mint virtual machine, from my Linux computer, through to my Windows computer, and open up the program in a window. Hello world, and save it to my desktop as hello world .txt here, and save, and then close. And now if you look on my Linux computer, there is the document right there. Also, if I want to run a web browser, I'll just type in Firefox. Launch Firefox, I get a few warnings, but as you see, Firefox launches perfectly. And now I can go to my website at dalbergetti.com, and there's my web page, except this time I can see the image. In the next part to this lesson, I'll show you how we can get an entire graphical user interface from Windows to Linux using xrdp and tight VNC server. In this lab, I'm going to remotely connect from my Windows computer to my Linux computer that I'm running here in a virtual machine, and I'm going to do it with an entire graphical user interface connected remotely. Now to do this, I'll need to go into Linux Mint, and I'm going to need to install a couple of programs. I'll type sudo apt-get install xrdp. Okay, RDP or xrdp has been installed, and I'm also going to need to install tight VNC server. Okay, now I can do a netstat -lvn pipe to more, and I can see that I'm listening on port 22 with my SSH server, and also I'm listening on port 3389. You can see here 0.0.0.0:3389. This is xrdp, but I don't see tight VNC server. So even though I installed tight VNC server, I don't see it running. I'll do the same command, except instead of lvn, I'll do -lvp for protocol. And once again, you can see here SSH, and let's see here, port 3389, but I don't see tight VNC server. So Control C. To do that, I'm going to just need to run tight VNC server. So I'll just type the name tight VNC server to launch it. And you will require a password to access your desktops. I'll put in my password. Would you like to enter a view-only password? And I'll put no. So I've launched tight VNC server. Let's see if it's running. I'll put netstat-lvp pipe to more. And you can see that now I'm listening on port 5901, process ID 5704, X tight VNC. And you can see here X11-1, process 5704, X tight VNC. So now tight VNC server is running, and we're listening on port 5901. Now, before I can connect with remote desktop from Windows to Linux, I'm going to need to edit my xrdp configuration. To do this, I'll type clear and sudo nano-c for line numbers, and I'll go to root etc xrdp /xrdp.ini file. open it up, and this is the config file for xrdp. I'll go down to line 18 and type address equals 0.0.0.0. Hit enter, and we can see here now I've added this line. Line 18, address equals 0.0.0. I'll do Control X, Y to save, and enter to accept the file name to write. And now all I need to do is restart xrdp. So sudo service xrdp restart. And that will restart the service. You can see okay, so it's been restarted. So now I can try to connect from my Windows computer to my Linux computer, Linux Mint, using remote desktop. Let's give it a try. I'll go to the Start menu, type MSTSC for Microsoft Terminal Services Client. There it is. Open it up. Put in the IP address that I want to connect to, which is my Linux computer at 192.168.3.152, and press connect. And I'll accept the security certificate. I'll put in my username and my password. And I'm connected. Isn't that awesome? Now, not only do I have a connection to Linux, but I have an entire graphical user interface using remote desktop. So a remote desktop connection from Windows to Linux. And now all I need to do is scroll around, and as you can see, I have access to my menu, and I can run the desktop and browse the desktop and have full graphical user support. Now this is excellent. Now the only thing that would be better than this is if I could encrypt the entire connection, and to do that I'll need to use an SSH port tunnel. So if I could get this remote desktop connection from Windows to Linux and put it through an SSH encrypted port tunnel, that would be even better. And so that's what I'm going to try to do next. So let's give that a go. So I'll close this remote desktop connection, and we'll try to run the entire thing, but this time I'm going to try to run it with an SSH port tunnel. In the last video, I connected from my Windows desktop to my Linux Mint computer running here in a virtual machine. I connected to it using remote desktop. This time I'm going to connect with remote desktop, except I'm going to try to send the connection through an SSH port tunnel. Now to do this, I'll need to go into Mint, and I'll need to reconfigure xrdp slightly. So I'll start up Nano with line numbering, and I'll go to the xrdp.ini file in root etc xrdp xrdp.ini. So we'll open that up, and I'll change address equals 0.0.0.0 to 127.0.0.1. Control X, Y, enter to save it. And now I'll also restart my service. So sudo service xrdp restart to restart the service, and I'll also restart SSH. Okay, and then I'm going to kill the xtight VNC service, or the program rather, and then I'll start it up again. So I'll launch tight VNC server. Okay, tight VNC server has launched. Let's take a look and see if we're listening with all those necessary services. Netstat-lvp pipe to more. And you can see that I'm listening on port 5901, X-Tight VNC, X11-1 here, X-Tight VNC. There's SSH, the SSH server, and there's port 3389 xrdp. Okay, so now all I need to do is go over to my Windows computer, and let's start by launching an SSH port tunnel. To do this, you just fire up PuTTY, put in the IP address that you want to connect to. So I'll put in the IP address of my Linux Mint machine at 192.168.3.152, port 22 SSH, except this time I'll go into the SSH settings and down to tunnels, and I'll set up a source port for the tunnel at port 5555, and at the destination we want to go to localhost :3389, click add, and this sets up our tunnel settings. We need tunnel settings on the source, so source localhost at 5555, and at the destination localhost 3389. I'll click open, log in as Dan, and put in my password. And so now the SSH port tunnel is open. All I need to do now is send protocol data through this port tunnel. So to do that, let's try to do it with remote desktop. I'll open up the remote desktop client at mstsc.exe, Microsoft Terminal Services Client, and I'll try to connect to myself, localhost :5555, and press connect. And you can see, yes, I want to do this connection. I'll put in my username Dan and the password student, and there it goes. I have a desktop connection to my Linux Mint computer through remote desktop, but it's actually being sent through an SSH port tunnel that I'm running here and that I put settings in for. So that's awesome. Let's open up a command prompt and take a look at that. I'll open up a command prompt, type netstat/a for all, pipe it to more. So take a look at this. 192.168.3.87, port 1192, Dan's VM SSH connection established. Notice that 127.0.0.1, 5555 to port 1194 established. So you can see that the port 55 has been established, and that I was listening, see it says listening here, at 127.0.0.1 myself, localhost, listening on port 5555, and I've got an established connection over 5555. So that's excellent. So now what we can do is, what I can do also is I'll close this connection with remote desktop, and let's try to do it again, except this time we'll do it slightly differently. So I'll exit here. So this time what I'm going to do is in Linux, I'm going to install Apache web server. I'll do a sudo apt-get install Apache 2, put in my password. Okay, and we'll put in a sudo service Apache 2 status, and you can see Apache 2 is running. So I'm running a web server right now on my Linux computer, and this time what I'll do is I'll go into PuTTY, connect to 192.168 .3.152, my Linux computer, SSH, except this time I'll go to my SSH settings, go to tunnels, and I'll say source port 5555 and destination localhost : send it up to port 80, which is the web server. I'll click add and open to open up the SSH port tunnel. Log in as Dan, put in my password, and there is the SSH port tunnel opened. Now all I need to do is open up Firefox, and now all I'll do is in the URL I'll type localhost : 5555 and press connect, and there it is. Localhost : 5555, put a port 80 request to myself on port 5555, where my SSH port tunnel is listening on source port 5555. It sent the web page request across the port tunnel over to the web server running on Mint. And as you can see, Apache 2, Ubuntu default page, this is the Apache 2 web server running on my Linux Mint virtual machine, sent to my Windows machine, encrypted through the port tunnel. So now I've sent two types of protocols across the port tunnel. I've sent remote desktop protocol and HTTP protocol request across the tunnel. I can send all kinds of protocol data across this SSH port tunnel, encrypting the communications. In the last video, I showed how to set up an SSH port tunnel from Windows to Linux using PuTTY to send protocols from Windows over to Linux securely and encrypted over the SSH port tunnel. But what if you want to copy files from your Windows computer to your Linux computer and you want to do it securely? A good way to do that is use the SCP protocol, or Secure Copy Protocol, which is run over port 22 SSH. Secure Copy Protocol is really easy to use. All we need to do is download WinSCP on our Windows computer, a quick Google search for WinSCP, and you'll find the download link to download the WinSCP client. Now, on your Linux computer, you want to make sure that your SSH server is running. So you want to type in sudo service SSH, and you could do a restart if you want. Restart your SSH server, and you can see that it's running now, or that I had it running and now I've restarted it. And now all I need to do is launch the WinSCP client on my Windows computer. So from Windows, I launch my WinSCP client. I choose the protocol SCP, Secure Copy Protocol, put in the IP address that I want to connect to, which is my Linux machine at 192.168.3.152. I'm connecting over port 22, my username, my password, and log in. The interface is very similar to FileZilla or to an FTP client. You've got your local computer on one side, and then the remote computer that you're connecting to on the right-hand side. So this is my Windows computer on the left. This is my Linux computer on the right. Notice if I double-click on desktop, there's the helloworld.txt file. You can see it here on the Linux computer, helloworld.txt. If I want to copy a picture, let's say, to here, all I need to do is on my local computer, I'll go over to the desktop, and I've downloaded a picture to copy over. There it is, server pics_1, and just drag and drop it over. And now it's copied across, and it's been encrypted, so it's a secure transfer. There's the file on the Linux computer. I can launch it, and you can see it's a picture of a motherboard. So Secure Copy Protocol is really, really useful. I can copy also from Linux over to Windows. I'll just go once again back to here. If I wanted to copy this helloworld.txt file over to my Windows computer, it's as simple as a quick drag and drop. And there it is, helloworld.txt. So really easy to use. Now all I need to do to close the connection is close WinSCP, and the connection's closed. When you connect for the first time with WinSCP, you may be prompted to add the security certificate. I forgot to mention that. So when you launch the program for the first time and you connect to your Linux computer, you will be prompted to add the security certificate. Now, so far, all of the communication has taken place connecting from Windows to Linux, but you can also connect from Linux to Windows. For instance, in Windows, if I right-click on Computer and go to Properties, you can see that on my Windows machine, Remote Settings, Remote, I have Remote Desktop enabled, and I'm allowing connections from computers running any version of Remote Desktop, less secure. Okay, so I'm running Remote Desktop, and I'm allowing connections to my Windows computer. So from Linux, all I need to do is open up a terminal, and I'll do a sudo apt-get install our desktop, and our desktop has been installed. Now I'll need to know the IP address that I want to connect to. So let me open up a quick command prompt here in Windows and check my IP address with an ipconfig command. And right now my IP address is 3.87. So in Linux, all I need to do is type r desktop 192.168.3.87. And you can see that I have a prompt to connect to my Windows computer. There's my username. All I need to do is put in my password and click go, and I'll have a remote desktop connection from Linux to Windows. I'm not going to do that now, but I could if I wanted to. Another thing that I want to mention before I close out my SSH labs is, so far, we've now talked about how to connect from one computer to the other and vice versa. But what if I just want to connect from a Linux computer to another Linux computer? If I wanted to do that, all I'd need to do, let's say that my Windows computer was also a Linux computer, is I would just type SSH and -X for X Windows support, and then the IP address, or I'm sorry, the username that I'm going to connect with. So Dan at, and then the IP address that I want to connect with. So if my Windows computer was also a Linux computer, I could just SSH with X Windows support, username Dan at the IP address I want to connect with, and all I need to do is put in my username and password, accept the security certificate, and I'd have an SSH connection with Graphical Windows support, so I could launch a program like gedit or Firefox or anything that required a graphical window.